afternoon, everybody. I am Joanne Ooi, the founder of V&A Festival, the Ideas Festival based in East Anglia, and I'm excited to kick off Avatars of Style today with our first session, The Future of Museums with Tristram Hunt. Avatars of Style is an exciting event because it's the first time that Battersea Power Station has opened Control Room A, the iconic space where power was distributed to London for a period of about 50 years, from the 1930s to the 1980s, to, again, 1/5 of London's electricity supply actually came from the power station. And this is an event also taking place roughly on the first anniversary of the reopening of the power station. So thank you so much for letting us host this exciting event. I also now want to thank Tristram for returning to the V&A Festival stage where he first appeared this summer, and he spoke about his most recent book, The Radical Potter, Josiah Wedgwood, and the Transformation of Britain. But today he's going to talk about something completely different, his day job as the director of the V&A Museum, and we're going to dig into subjects that we didn't have any time to discuss when he first graced our stage during the summer. So to begin, then this is going to be kind of like a personal, professional type of interview, and I hope a special one. But for those of you who don't know about his storied and glorious scholarly and TV career, as well as a political one, Tristram was actually the MP of Stoke-on-Trent for 7 years, as well as the Shadow Secretary for Education during this period, before he took over the reins of the museum in 2017. So my first question is, Tristram, how does running a museum compare to being an MP?
Well, Joanne, thank you very much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be in this incredible setting, and it kind of says something that I'm sure we'll come on to, thinking about museums and culture that both Tate Modern in the old power station there, and then us in the Battersea power station, a new cultural space that has transformed London. So as you said, I was a Member of Parliament for 7 years for Stoke-on-Trent Central, having previously been a historian. And when I got the job as director of the Victoria and Albert Museum, some did ask unkindly what, as a Westminster MP, had prepared me for working in a vast Victorian edifice surrounded by gnarled historical artefacts. And somehow there was some correlation between the world of Westminster and the V&A. One of the differences is actually, I always felt at Westminster, Westminster, that great kind of Pugin Barry building, full of historicism, the Victoria and Albert Museum, built later, but a kind of another mid-19th century triumphant building. But at Westminster, you always felt that history was kind of a barrier, that it was nostalgia, and it was slightly sort of cloying, and you were slightly dragged by the history. Whereas at the V&A, I always feel we've got 1.7 million objects, and God, are we counting those closely at the moment, stretching back 5,000 years, telling the story of human ingenuity. But the history is always really exciting. We're engaged in this really critical, exciting conversation with the meaning of the past and what it means for the present. And I didn't feel that at Westminster. But what you do pick up, I think, as a politician, is, some of the human skills, and some, you find this hard to believe, some of the emotional intelligence, some of the understanding of different, factional interests, although there is no one more political than a V&A curator, I can tell you. That's where politics really lands. But also, I think, this really strong sense you have as a Member of Parliament of accountability to the public, that British Members of Parliament are, for the most part, in their constituencies on a Friday, holding constituency surgeries, hearing from the public in a very, very direct way. And these members of the public are taxpayers who are now supporting the V&A. And I always felt that we, as recipients of taxpayers' money, holding this national collection on behalf of you, the public, and the country, have that kind of sense of accountability and responsibility. And I kind of took that with me. And I suppose finally the biggest difference, though, is that I was always in opposition. I was a Labour Member of Parliament, always in opposition. And so you could critique, you could kind of frame things, but you couldn't realise change. Whereas at the V&A, it's a big organisation with incredible collections and reach, we can actually do things. And whether it's exhibitions or education programmes or international partnerships, the ability to actually make a difference is very fulfilling.
Okay, and on that note, actually, why don't we talk about the expansion of the V&A and some of the initiatives that you have taken, because, as you were saying, you're able to have much more direct control steering an organization, even as large as the V&A, compared to being a member of Parliament. So what are some of the biggest initiatives and projects that you have undertaken or that have both occurred during your tenure, which may have started beforehand, and that you're now initiating, or that you've started since you started in 2017?
So the big change at the V&A over the coming years is really moving from a museum of and around solely South Kensington with its historic outpost, Bethnal Green Museum, opened in 1872, which I'll come on to becoming much more of a multi-site museum. In the same way that Tate Modern has Tate Britain, Tate St Ives, Tate Liverpool. We're branching out, and we kind of, in a sense, begin here on the banks of the Tay with V&A Dundee. This should have been V&A Blackpool. The original idea was in the kind of mid-2000s, 2005, 2007, a very strong push by the Labour government for national museums to have a much stronger regional footprint. And the idea was to have a V&A Blackpool. The V&A has always had this incredible theatre and performance collection. The Theatre Museum became part of the V&A. And so drawing upon Blackpool's performance history was to create a museum in Blackpool. It fell apart, the plan fell apart, I mean, really through failure of leadership in Blackpool Council, who took a big chunk of public money and rather than building a new museum, refurbished the Winter Gardens for the sort of 5th time to no great outcome. And when the very enterprising council leaders and university leaders in Dundee heard that Blackpool had fallen apart, they got on the phone to my great predecessor, Mark Jones, and said, well, what about Dundee? And so was born the idea of V&A Dundee. And it's called V&A Dundee, but actually we're just a partner organisation within this, alongside the 2 universities in Dundee, Dundee City Council and the Scottish Government. And very much like the Guggenheim in Bilbao, it was this notion of culture-led regeneration for a post-industrial city, dealing with the collapse of the jute industry, of the manufacturing sector, even the IT sector from the 1980s. And to have a kind of a sense of confidence about culture and architecture and identity through a new building and a new collection. So designed by Kengo Kuma, the great Japanese architect who designed the Tokyo Olympic Festival. It sits right on the Tay. The architecture is modelled on the granite cliffs of Scotland. And inside, there's a permanent gallery, the Scottish Design Galleries, telling the story of Scottish design, alongside alongside a temporary exhibition space where we've got an excellent exhibition, Tartan, on at the moment. And it's done so much of what we hoped it would achieve in terms of bringing attention to Dundee, bringing inward investment, bringing tourism, bringing regeneration. And it's a really exciting architectural statement as well. It would be good if the train from Edinburgh to Dundee didn't take like an hour and 20 minutes, stopping at every cowshed along the way, and there could be a slight greater sort of speed there. But it's also doing what we wanted to achieve in terms of education programs and community programs. So V&A Dundee is the first stage in many ways of this kind of multi-site program.
I have a question about how you said that you have 2 important partner stakeholders in this project, the municipality, and then there was another one. But I know that there's also a project in China, which launched a few years ago. Do you actually foresee that that's a business model, or it's something that you can replicate in order to increase the footprint of the V&A? Is it attractive? What are the respective responsibilities of each partner in such a case? I think the public actually knows very little about how museums are often run, like the Guggenheims abroad.
So this one is that there is, in a sense, a private limited company that owns V&A Dundee. And if you drill down, if you're a lawyer, if you drill down to it, it's a licensing agreement from the V&A to this limited company of which we're a partner. But thankfully, it's become much richer and more detailed than that. So we've got, our curators that work there, our conservators that work there. Leonie Bell, who's the director of V&A Dundee, is a great cultural leader. So actually, it's a really strong and rich cultural partnership. In China, we had a relationship with an organization called the China Merchants Group to create some permanent galleries and an exhibition space in Shenzhen, sort of massive new city just next to Hong Kong, just on mainland China. A UNESCO design city, a city focused on the importance of design. And that was a 5-year a licensing and partnership agreement from which we earned good money, but also we were excited to work with up-and-coming contemporary designers in that part of China. We're thinking about renewing that at the moment, but we've got to find the right vehicle for that. But we're not a franchise model, unlike the Guggenheim, which you have to. Even to allow the Guggenheim to begin the conversation, you've got to put down $200 million. If only we were. But it's about the creative and cultural partnerships that we can build in these areas. And Dundee, it's working really well. China, we'll see if it goes to the next stage.
You were going to continue telling us about the multi-site program.
Yes, I think. Do we have a next?
Yes, we do. We do. Oh, wait. No. Oops, I just turned it off.
So here we are in East London on the V&A East Museum. So you will remember that the premise of sort of gaining the Olympics for London was always that it was, not going to be a flash in the pan, that you were then going to have this regeneration mission for East London. And I don't know if you've been to it recently, but the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park now is transforming itself. And at the cultural heart of it, right next to Zaha Hadid's wonderful swimming pool, is this cultural area called East Bank, which really is the 21st century answer to South Bank. And there you have Sadler's Wells East, a hip-hop academy from Sadler's Wells. You have the BBC choirs. I've sort of lost track of the various reorganizations, but we know there's going to be BBC choirs and concert facilities there. You've got the University of the Arts London, London College of Fashion, so you've got the consolidation of all the fashion schools there. And then you have V&A East Museum, which has many inspirations. It's designed by this brilliant husband and wife architecture team, O'Donnell Toomey. And they're partly inspired by an X-ray we did at the V&A of a Balenciaga dress for this. And then they're partly also inspired, they say, by the sleeve from the Vermeer in Dublin, in the National Art Gallery in Dublin. And that has produced this beautifully designed clad concrete building, which is much more generous inside than you think. What we're going to have here is an exhibition space, but also galleries focused on the history of making and designing with a particular locus in East London. And if we think of that story of creativity in East London, stretching back to Spitalfields, to the Jewish community, the Huguenot community, the plastics, the invention of plastics in the mid-19th century, the bow pottery tradition, right up to the furniture tradition, all the way. So drawing upon the V&A collection, but with this focus on contemporary making and designing in East London, sitting alongside these other exciting cultural institutions like a modern South Bank. So this will open in spring-summer 2025. And it is in the youngest, most diverse, fastest growing part of London, who with the best will in the world, we find it difficult to draw all the way to South Kensington. So having a footprint there in Newham, Tower Hamlets, is really important, I think, for the kind of social mission of the V&A. Because also these are where the creators of tomorrow are working. And we need to be what we've always been, which is a source book, which is a storehouse for them to draw upon for their creative practice and being in and amongst them. What we're also building is this second facility here, which is V&A East Storehouse. So 2 facilities on the Olympic Park. The V&A has, as I've said, 1.7 million objects. We have 60,000 objects on display within the galleries of South Kensington, of around 250,000 displayable objects. The others are study objects. So the question museum directors always get is, where have you hidden the other stuff? And we used to hide the other stuff in a place called Blythe House, which some of you may know, just next to Olympia, which was an old general post office. And it was the kind of scene, for those of you who remember Alec Guinness in the Le Carre films, Smiley, it was the setting for the circus, because it does look like a kind of spook sort of town. Anyway, the government have sold that off for much needed luxury flats in West London. And so we've all had to move. So the British Museum has moved to Reading, the Science Museum have moved to Swindon, and we at the V&A have moved to Stratford, to Hackney Wick, and created what we're calling V&A East Storehouse. And the idea here, rather like that, imagine like Battersea Power Station, but just full of the artifacts of the V&A, that you can wander around and see the hidden storage. We've also then got the space to recreate some of our great historic rooms, like the Frank Lloyd Wright office he designed for Edgar Kaufman, the Torios ceiling, this amazing 15th century Italian ceiling. And we have what we're calling these hacked ends. So it's not gallery level displays, but it's not sort of gallery level interpretation, but it gives you some insight into the nature of the collections and what we're doing with them in a kind of open flowing way. And we think it's a really exciting way to access this storage. What it also means is that if you, as a member of the public or a scholar or an artist, want to order an object, you want to study an object for yourself, you want to look at that 15th century Venetian glass for yourself, you will have the study rooms and facilities to do that. So you'll order ahead, a week ahead online, and then it will be there for you to see and study for yourself. We have that facility in Blythe House with our textiles centre, and now we're going to expand it to all our objects. So hopefully that very democratic idea, which was always at the heart of the V&A, that this is, all of this belongs to all of you, as Henry Cole once said, will be available again in the storehouse.
I think on that note, I also want to ask you about your belief about the mission of the V&A, about exposing especially young people to excellent design from as early as possible, and obviously this is part of it. But the V&A actually conducts numerous initiatives and programs nationwide to ensure that happens. And will you be able to do more of that at V&A East? And also tell us about this, because when you blog, that's actually one of the top subjects that Tristram feels passionately about. So please tell us about the importance of design.
I mean, we're all here because we love design, but there is this terrible crisis of creativity, particularly in the state secondary school system in England. We've had a 73% drop in the number of young people taking design and technology GCSE over the last 13 years. Art GCSEs have held up a bit, but when you look at the totality of the creative subjects in our education system, music, drama, art, design and technology, just at the moment of the fourth industrial revolution, when you want that creative component within the education system, we're stripping it out. And it's the result of a kind of combination of factors. Funding, it's more expensive to do these subjects. Curriculum restrictions from the government, that schools are not judged on those creative subjects, so there's no incentive to pursue them. Concerns from parents and students about tuition fees. And so, you know, if you're going into higher education, you know, if you're putting all that money up, you want to absolutely make sure you become a vet at the end of it or something, you know, sort of deliverable. All of this is eating away at what we're really good at in this country, which is art and design and creative subjects. And the creative economy is something we're spectacular at. So the V&A was born partly of the design school movement of the 1830s and 40s. The Royal College of Art came out of the V&A. We've always had this really strong connection to teaching design. So it seemed to me that it was really important for the V&A to not only to kind of highlight this, but to do something about it. So we run a few projects. One of them is called Design Lab Nation, which is focused on Key Stage 4 students to take design and technology. And what we do is we lend our objects from the collection right around the country. We're in Plymouth and Blackburn and Ipswich and Stoke-on-Trent and Coventry. We partner with local museums, we partner with local schools, we partner with local businesses to kind of excite them about the opportunities connected to this subject, to support the teachers with their bosses, saying this is really important, you can come down to the V&A, to provide curriculum training material, professional development, creating a kind of cohort now of design and technology teachers to support them in their profession, to give them the confidence, say this is a really brilliant subject and it opens up all these doors. So it's about bringing as many students into the V&A, but also sharing our collections nationally. And in Stratford, we've got a series of creative studios where we'll be able to do much more of this kind of hand, you know, for all the wonders of digital, the ability to see the object in front of you and to see the play of light on silver or ceramics, or to turn it over and understand the skill of the craft is so powerful, I think. So this is a really important part of what we do, vital actually.
Now, I want to just ask you a much more general question. How do we convince the average member of the public of the importance of art and culture in childhood formation or in civic engagement? What do you suggest?
Well,
I mean,
do you have the young V&A?
No, we don't have the picture of the young V&A.
So the kind of the other component of what we've been working on is the transformation of museum, much loved, many of you will have been to it, the Museum of Childhood in Bethnal Green. And it was much loved by parents and grandparents, and not much loved by children. Because parents and grandparents enjoyed a kind of nostalgic journey through their own childhood. And the children said, well, why have I got to look at this action man from 1972 behind a glass, you know, case, and felt a bit bored. And what we've done is turn it from a museum of childhood, which really told the social history of childhood, to a museum for children. We've rebranded it. It's now Young V&A, and it's focused on teaching art and design and creativity for 0 to 14-year-olds. Really, it's working out as 0 to 11-year-olds. And everything we've learned recently about neurological development and early years shows the importance of play, the importance of imaginary worlds, the importance of collaborative play with other children, the importance of stimulation with parents, getting the parents off their phones, connecting to their children in early years spaces. So we've created 3 galleries: design, imagination, and play. And we've used the full kind of penumbra of the V&A collections, from, you know, Frankenstein monster suits and Superman suits to samurai swords to David Hockney prints to wonderful works of marble sculpture. Really just to kind of get those neurons buzzing, to get the creative impulses going in the early years, and to get young people to think, well, you know, museums are for me, objects aren't too scary. Isn't it interesting how this was made? From the design of scooters to fashion to cartoons. And so getting young people interested and passionate about art and design and getting their parents to feel connected to this is a really important part of what we've sought to do there. So do go and visit Young V&A. I'd visit during the week, it's slightly calmer. And we opened in June, July, we've had a great summer. And what we've also done for the first time, we've just opened an exhibition specifically designed for children. So it's called Myth to Manga. And it's a story of how contemporary Japanese culture draws upon long traditions within Japanese myth-making and history. And we're using a beautiful array of objects from our Japanese collections. But it's at knee height. It's all focused on how children can access this history of Japan and what it means for them today. And so it's the first exhibition we've done using these objects specifically for children, and we're gonna see how it does.
I'm gonna go and check that out for sure, and stoop the whole time. No, I'm gonna press you on this because I think it's one of the biggest issues that we're confronting today in society. So, putting your MP hat back on, if you actually could wave a magic wand and enact a series of laws or funding or what would you do to actually put art and culture and design, bring it back to prominence the way it deserves?
There's definitely a funding issue because they're not stripping out art and design and music and drama in the independent sector. They're building more theatres and more wet rooms, and the kilns are working. So there is definitely an increase to be made, to my mind, in the per head funding of pupils. I would change the way in which schools are kind of adjudicated on the curriculum. So whether it's the EBAC or Progress 8, having arts and creative subjects within that. So it is in the interests of head teachers to promote these subjects makes a difference. Making sure that Ofsted, when it inspects a school, and it's getting there now, inspects a full and broad curriculum. So you can't just nail the English and maths and be outstanding. If you're not doing drama, if you're not doing art, if you're not doing design, you can't be an outstanding school, as you're not, frankly. So making that a subject of school inspection. And then I think there's a broader piece of work which is beyond the school, which is what we're involved with, which is making that case to parents and educators that the arts are not only, rewarding in and of themselves, but they are good material if you want to be a graphic designer, if you want to be a computer game designer, in film and television, all these areas where actually we're very good in the UK. These are the subjects that enable you to pursue those careers. So there is stuff to be done in schools, but there's a broader cultural conversation which we're all responsible for to ensure this takes place.
Okay, now on that note also, I want to transition to a more thorny and difficult part of our interview, which is, as you were saying at the beginning, that what's really exciting about the V&A is that basically history is the joy is to bring it alive, and that's what the V&A does. A lot of it is obviously, the collection is based on objects which have been acquired during empire building, and this happens to be one of the most controversial and politically charged periods of museum direction. So how have you been dealing with some of these issues so that, I'd love to find out your personal and professional, and the museum's stated position as well as your own personal position about how to deal with questions like funding, deaccession, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, et cetera, et cetera. We can, if you don't mind, I'd love to just talk about each one by one. So let's start with funding. About there was the issue of the Sacklers, obviously, which triggered a firestorm of controversy with most of the museums deciding to remove the Sackler name, and the V&A being the last major British institution to do so. What do you think is the right attitude towards such a situation, and tell us about this in this episode?
So the V&A is our turnover is around 85 million pounds a year, 85, 90 million pounds a year. We get just under half of that from you, the taxpayer, and me, the taxpayer, through a straight grant from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. We get about 43, 44 million pounds from them. And the rest is self-generated income. The rest we make up ourselves. And then that's a combination of things. That is people buying tickets for exhibitions. That is people becoming members, which is a very good idea. That is buying things in the shop, catering. It's corporate hospitality. It's hiring out the spaces. It's selling exhibitions abroad. It's licensing our wonderful William Morris collections of wares. We're an entrepreneurial museum, and we've no shame in that. We began, one of our original titles was the Museum of Manufacture. We began at the Great Exhibition of 1851. So, the shop is in the middle of the museum. We've got no, where we celebrate makers and designers and artists. So making money is something we don't have any kind of problem with. And then we also get large philanthropic gifts, particularly for capital campaigns. If we want to redo a gallery, if we want to acquire a beautiful object, that means we need to raise money. And it's right that is done in a transparent and open way, because what's essentially happening is that our money from government has been flat for a good 5 years, and if inflation is at 10% so we are steadily seeing the reduction in what we get from the state, at the same time as ever greater demands for accountability as to what we're getting from elsewhere. And it's fine. That's my job. Is to manage that. We became. Many institutions were under fire for historically taking money from the Sackler family. Teresa Sackler was a trustee of the V&A for many years, and a very good trustee. And we had to kind of weigh up that heritage of giving and support and personal engagement with the museum, with the revelations surrounding the opioid crisis. We could be either, sort of praised for, standing by those who give to the organisation, or criticised for not acting swiftly. What the Sacklers did was say, if having our name on the museum is an impediment to you as a cultural organisation, i.e. working with artists, such as Nan Golding, or it's a barrier for members of the public entering the museum, which it was becoming, then that's the last thing we want, and please remove our name. And so we did do that, and removed it. But we had a relationship with Teresa Sackler, who was supportive of the museum, and so we were amongst the last to remove.
Okay. You were lucky. They allowed you to sidestep that issue by inviting you to remove her name. No, but let's say that didn't happen. I'm sorry to press you on that. But what if you had to make a unilateral decision without the permission or the encouragement of a donor, because subsequently it had been discovered that this corporation was engaged in some kind of moral turpitude?
I think, first of all, you want to be upstream of that. So, we do due diligence, we do the research on donors, we turn down money every year, which we don't think is right. But we also know that, as it were, the times change. If we think of the Getty money, the Rockefeller money, the Huntington money, very big petrochemical railroad, but the other was petrochemical money, which, as it were, the third and fourth generations of those family are themselves now disavowing. Does one take do you take the, and I think you take it on a step-by-step basis, but I think also as a historian, you have to understand that people work in the cultural context of their time, and if a few generations later you want to have a kind of moral judgment on that, I'd be careful about that. But what are we here for? We're here to celebrate art and design and to bring in new audiences and to work with creators. And if you're being held back by, in a sense, legacies of a previous era, then you need to act because we're not here simply to burnish that past. So it's a case-by-case basis,
right.
But I'd go upstream ideally.
Excellent answer. Now, actually segueing into my question about how you were quoted once saying about, I'm going to just read it here. I rather like Anthony Gormley's suggestion that his statue be turned to face the wall. This is in connection to a statue of Cecil Rhodes. It doesn't deny his existence, but it conveys our sense of shame about him. And this was a perspective which was called retain and explain, rather than discarding or relegating the controversial object to the warehouse. So elaborate a little bit on that. What is the right attitude or the right approach to a very politically charged object, which is, a lightning rod?
I think there's a difference between sort of public monumentality and museum collections. And the rules of the land now are that, retain and explain is sort of planning policy. So the removal of statues, such as the Colston statue, is if not prohibited by the government, disavowed. And instead, in a sense, you accumulate knowledge and understanding of those objects, of those statues through different interpretations. And I'm generally in favor of that. I'm generally in favor of a kind of critical response to figures from the past who we no longer feel should have that level of approbation. And we have so many artists and so many creative activists who can respond to those works. Because if you remove the works totally, then in a sense you're removing a knowledge of the history. Whereas if you're saying, well, we understand this was a figure in history, but we express our kind of moral horror at what they did in an interesting and creative way, I think that's a way through. In terms of museum collections, though, and this might go on to your other issue, we are, the V&A, along with the British Museum and a number of other museums, our trustees are legally unable to deaccession, to remove objects from the collection. So when it comes to questions of restitution and repatriation, the V&A and the British Museum are legally bound to keep hold of everything within their collections. This is not the case for lots of other museums around the country, and so we're seeing, just today, I saw images of the restitution of a totem pole from Glasgow, from National Museum Scotland. We've seen restitutions from Aberdeen, from Cambridge, from the Horniman Museum. There's lots of activity going on between, as it were, European museums and the global south in terms of the movement of collections. But we often focus on the British Museum for obvious reasons. And the British Museum is governed by the 1963 British Museum Act, which prevents the trustees deaccessioning. And we're governed by the 1983 National Heritage Act, which prevents us deaccessioning. And so there are some items in our collection at the V&A, notably the Magdala collection from Ethiopia, looted in 1868, and the Ashanti collection, looted during the Ashanti Wars in 1874, which are subject to restitution demands by those governments. And legally, those cannot be fulfilled unless the law changes. So what we do is, A, be very transparent about the history of those objects, how they came into the collection, why, the nature of those imperial wars, and then try to work in partnership with organizations and museums and governments in those countries and offer what we call renewable cultural partnerships, which is essentially renewable long-term loans of these items. And quite rightly, politicians in those countries often say, well, hold on, you want us to borrow from you what you stole from us. And we have to say, legally, at the moment, that's all we can do. Now, there's a general election next year. And if governments want to if parties want to put into their manifesto changing that law, that's the way it can happen. At the moment, as a museum director of the V&A, who I'm very, very, adamant about operating under the rule of law, I can be as creative as I can be within the confines of that. My view is that the law should change and that the trustees of the museum should have the ability to deaccession objects from the collection. But the reason that law hasn't changed is historically for good reasons, which is that every generation regards the sort of work of no one needs this, no. So the V&A was smashing wonderful plaster cast copies of South Asian temples and South Asian statues as late as the 1950s, because no one thought they were of any interest or any use. And so having some sense of humility also about your understanding of what's important about the past is what the Act does. It prevents the kind of hubris of the contemporary saying, well, no one's interested in an early work by Turner, let's get rid of that. Whereas now, obviously, we would be. But I think there are other factors at play, and, as we wrestle with the kind of legacies of the colonial and imperial past and the kind of, the growing number of museums in Africa and their demands for collection, there are other factors to think about in terms of this conversation. Very long answer, sorry.
No, that was an excellent, nuanced answer, which I think satisfied or at least placated everybody in the room. Very good politician kind of training, I think. I want directly related to that. What have you found to be the most challenging, difficult episode of your tenure so far running the V&A? Has it been one of these episodes? Was it the pandemic? What's been the most difficult?
I think it was the pandemic, and then we had the terrible murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and the sense of where cultural institutions were in that conversation, and because also everyone was on Zoom, you lack those touch points in an organization of being in the canteen, of understanding what people were thinking, how your visitors were thinking, what your staff were thinking. But then working through the pandemic and the restructure, and we had to make 14% cuts in headcount, and the vast majority of that was through voluntary. But day after day, I was writing these notes saying, thank you very much for your, and because it's the V&A, 41 years of service, 37 years of service, these incredibly, and many of them did the really honourable thing for the organisation, which is to say, well, do you know what? I've had a good. I'm leaving 3 years earlier than I would have liked, or 4 years earlier than I would have liked. But if I don't go, it means that 2 junior posts will have to go. And a lot of people behave very, very. But it was very tough, that actually. And that I'd say that was amongst the most difficult times.
And then I think this is actually a good moment to open the floor to questions. We're going to pass around a mic so that anybody please raise your hand and we'll pass the mic to you. The lady in the very back, in the back.
Hello?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
To the question about custody, and obviously what's happened with the British Museum being a issue that everyone's talking about now, can you give us a look behind the veil at how exactly with these the distribution of treasure in various locations, how do you keep track of what you have, and how do you enable people from the outside to even know where to go to see what you've got that's not on display?
This is in a sense the challenge, that we want it to be as accessible as possible whilst as secure as possible. And so we have a very, very good online database, Explore the Collections, which with increasingly number of good high-resolution images, which will show you the full extent of the collections and where it is. Gallery 57, not on show, in store. And we're in a transition moment because we're packing up one storage and going to another storage. So it's very hard to access our storage collection at the moment. When it's at the storehouse, you'll be able to look it up online, see if it's in store or in a gallery. If it's in a gallery, go and see it for yourself. If it's in a store, see if it's able for you to study yourself. And then we've got to get the right security, considerations in place. What we do is we do a 5% annual audit of all the collections. So, different types, different sizes, different value. So we're continually ensuring, we hope, that we're up to date with where everything is. But inevitably, with a collection of 1.7 million objects, there are going to be losses. We had off, the museum lost its first item in 1866. Since then, there have never been more. Our big challenge to explaining to the media and the public is that there's a difference between not in place, i.e. my mobile phone is not where I thought it was, and missing. And so when we do a spot check, things can be not in place. They might be going to an exhibition, they might be on loan, but they're not missing yet. But telling someone, oh, well, where is it? Well, I don't know. Was it missing? No. It's not in place. But is it missing? No. So only when something is not in place for 5 years does it become missing. Because of the size of the organisation, the movement of the objects, and all the rest of it. I appreciate that's difficult to explain. And if something's difficult to explain, there's often something wrong with it. So we are looking at that. But it's a way of saying that not everything not in place is lost.
But where are these 2.5 million objects now?
So altogether we have, and then it gets even more complicated. We have 1.7 million objects, but we have another 900,000 works on paper and archival material. And they are at either South Kensington Museum, where there's both galleries and storage, or they're at Blythe House, or they're at the storehouse. But they're all in cases at the moment because of this big move. This is the biggest move since World War II, so it's a really big endeavour.
Wow. Next. Oh, lots of questions. Okay, please, this on the aisle, right there. Oh, it's not on yet. Sorry.
Is that on now?
Yes.
Okay. So just concentrating on the future of museums. I'm just interested, you've told us a lot about the amazing things the V&A are doing, but in terms of the way young people engage with things now, I just wondered if there was some more radical ideas, not necessarily at the V&A, but for museums in general, that you could see coming in the future, and any museums that do exist or are about to open that you feel are particularly progressive?
So it's a mix. I think there are lots of exciting new museums, like the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, which is, India has a strong tradition of attendance at performances and public events. There is not a traditional culture of museum going, and particularly for young people. So how do you get young people to come into a gallery in Bengaluru? There's a very interesting guy called Abhishek Poddar who's created this new museum to try and crack that code. And understanding that young museum goers are digital natives, understanding how they want to interact with objects, how they want to be part of a conversation. The architecture of museums has changed so much that rather kind of didactic narrative approach is now much more collaborative and informative. We now talk about co-curation and co-design, thinking about community voice or audience voice in the display. And I think there's always this balance, because on the one hand, you do want that sense of ownership and engagement, but we're not a community centre. this is about also education. This is about also broadening horizons and challenging, and the expertise of curators and educators and designers to try and push the audience as well. And so how do you do that without, as it were, being elitist, but also being challenging? And so I think the way through is to have as inviting a welcome to the organisation as possible, but not lose sight of that kind of cultural mission of the institution. For young people at the V&A, fashion and photography, really important vehicles for bringing new audiences, but also a contemporary program. So we run the London Design Festival. We have a Friday late on the last Friday of every month where there's a kind of takeover by new artists and community groups and activists. And actually, lots of young makers and designers are excited to engage with the collections, and they might be kind of, in a sense, horrified by some of the past connected with them, but that setting and fabric is of interest to them. So I think engaging with the digital, engaging with contemporary program makers and artists, and thinking about the subject matter. But we have to reinvent ourselves each time. I always say, who would have thought 25 years ago that newspapers were on the verge of collapse? In 25 years, we need to make sure we're connecting to a new generation.
Okay. Lady in the fuchsia sweater.
Up for this.
Thank you.
Well, my question is related to the last question, and it's around young people and engaging young people. I was wondering if the V&A has an outreach program that encourages, because as you said yourself, trying to get young people into the museum in the first place is often the greatest hurdle. And I'm governor of a sixth form college in Balham, St Francis Xavier School, and they are particularly, one of their successes is around design and art. And they get a lot of their students going to the best universities to do design and art. But they sometimes they feel, well, maybe things like museums are a little bit, they see it in a certain category. So do you have people who will go out to colleges and give talks, or maybe bring along some artifacts, and hopefully to bring them back again, of course. So I think that would be of great interest, and I'd like to know, if you do it, how do I find out more?
Absolutely. We've got a vast education team. In East London at the moment, my colleague Gus Casely-Hayford is going school to school with objects and artifacts, trying to, as we create a new museum, build up that connection to local schools and partners. It's much better for your sixth formers from Balham to come in to the V&A and see the objects with the curators. So after this, we'll get you my details. Just send me an email. I'll connect you up with the education team, and we'll get them in.
Okay, next question. All right, this lady with the maroon.
Hello, thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I teach design at the University of the Arts, and one of the problems we have is that foundation courses have been phased out. I was just considering, obviously the foundation course is based on the Bauhaus model, where you do performance and ceramics and every kind of arts in a kind of experimental way. And it just occurred to me that actually influencing that lower down in education, in secondary and primary schools, might be a better way of teaching the very broad arts together in combination.
I think that's right. I honestly think, having had three children go through the state primary sector in London, that the creative component in primary is not bad, actually. I think it could be better. There could be kind of more challenge within it, but there's not. It's not just kind of phonics. There's enough sort of going on. I think it just falls off a cliff in secondary, and I think that key stage 3, that transition in 11 to 14-year-olds of holding it. Before it's, I've got to pick my GCSEs and I've got to kind of, and that's the moment we really try and focus on by, in a sense, empowering the design and technology teachers to be you know, the most creative. You know what it's like. You want to be with the most creative, the most interesting, the most engaged teacher, because that's how the subject comes alive. I'm very worried, you know, what's happening. Foundation courses are so important, and they're such a vehicle then for further growth. And we're so, you know, historically so very good at producing them in this country as well. But as much upstream, and I think, I mean, you're right also, though, it's particularly for young girls, having education, so primary school girls, having not work experience, but work immersion, just seeing a different sense of what possibilities are by coming to, you know, a design school or coming to that moment of horizon shifting is really, really valuable for them, I think.
Okay, one last question from the first row.
Hello. You may have already answered this question, but are you still accepting funds from the Sacklers?
We're not.
Okay.
All right. I want to just ask you one last fun and uplifting question. I hope it's uplifting. What was your favorite show at the V&A?
I love all my children. I think, do you know what? I hugely enjoyed our Donatello exhibition, which we had recently, partly because of the design within it was so very, very good, and some of the loans were fantastic. And at the other end of the spectrum, I enjoyed our Christian Dior exhibition, which was a very kind of theatrical and immersive now. But I never tell my colleagues in Chanel that, because now I enjoy Chanel.
Fathom House.
More. Exactly.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. That was good.